Okay, we're going to begin our third unit now, which we just finished up with the brain and got the test, got the project, got the video, all that kind of good stuff done. So now we're moving on into the next part. We're still into cognitive memory. Cognitive memory is dealing again with the consciousness and also parts of the unconsciousness part of the brain. It's kind of going back to what we were discussing about Freud there. And but now cognitive psychology has a lot more to go with because of the research, because of the data, the empirical research that's been done on it. What we're going to get into with this unit is actually two chapters here that you're going to have to be studying over and getting into. So you got, I think, both chapters. I think it's 7 and 8 on memory, and I'll have to double check that. But the first chapter is on chapter 7, and that's going to be dealing with memory. And then we're going to get into a little bit on intelligence, which I believe is chapter 8. And what we're going to get into with memory is we're going to talk about how is memory actually done. What is the process of it? So we're going to go through the 3 parts: encoding, storage, and retrieval. Then we're going to get into the intelligence part and get into a lot about when it comes to psychology and intelligence. It's different than when you think about intelligence in terms of brain and being really gifted or mentally handicapped kind of thing. But we're going to get into that. We're going to talk about the problem solving, decision making part of that, and then we're also going to get into how is intelligence actually measured. So kind of getting us into the first part of memory here. What we're going to talk about is the 3 key questions. How does information get into your memory? How is information maintained in your memory? And then how is information pulled back out? To do this, we're going to look at 3 key processes of memory. First is encoding. Encoding is getting the information in. Now I'm going to try to use as much as I can examples here to try to help you understand this, so you need to make sure you pay very close attention to what I'm talking about. If you do that, you're doing encoding. Okay, that's that simple. If you want to do well on this next unit, it's very, very simple. You have to do the first part. That is focusing, paying attention. Okay? If you're right now spacing out and you didn't listen to anything I'm saying, then you might as well shut the recorder off and turn back on whatever game you were playing, because you're going to fail. You have to be able to focus and pay attention to these presentations. You've got to get this stuff into your mind. If it takes you 3 or 4 times to listen to these videos, then you need to do that. That's the first part, is encoding, getting this into your brain. The second part is storing it, maintaining it, and you do that through concentration. We're going to get into that. There's 2 key parts there. And then the last part is being able to retrieve it back out again. And as most of you know, when you're sitting on a test and you're just sitting there and you can't remember something, it's simply because of the fact that you cannot recall it, probably because you have what's called retrieval failure. And we're going to get into why do we forget, how do we forget, and then we're going to talk about ways to try to conquer that. So let's talk about the first of the 2 of the 3 processes, and that is getting the information in, focusing. It's called encoding. There's 2 types of encoding. One is automatic, the other is effortful. The automatic one, simple, no problem. Most of you guys, if you're dealing with sports or if you're dealing with life, you do automatic encoding all the time. That's where you don't even have to concentrate to remember something. It just hits you and it locks it into your brain, okay? This is why a lot of times I get football players, basketball players, they get these playbooks and they have to memorize, and they don't have a problem doing that because they are able to memorize it by doing the activity, by running the play, by running through it, and by doing that enough times, and also with the fact that they're focusing so much because they want to learn this stuff so that they can play. That is automatic. Effortful, that means taking time and effort to remember something. So paying attention, what is it? It's focusing awareness on narrowed range of stimuli. The key to paying attention is filtering out and devoting to the stimuli. You have to filter. There's 3 types of filters that you need to make sure you work on. The first is early. Early filtering or early screening, either way you want to say that, is basically dealing with the concept that before you start listening to these presentations, you have to get in the right mindset. You can't tell yourself, okay, fine, I'll listen to this real fast, and I gotta go do this real quick, because all you're going to do is focus on what you have to go get done. And you're going to be looking at the time, and you're going to be worrying about it. So instead, focus. Number two is when you are doing the listening, doing the presentations and trying to get the information, you have to filter out all of those distractions. So do this in a quiet place. Do this with headphones. Do it somewhere where you don't have to worry about someone bothering you. And number three, when you're focusing back on it later to try to recall it, you have to be able to, again, be able to have those filters on. Now, there was a study done by Craig, and this study by Craig was very important because it was able to talk about dividing attention. And this was dealing with the negative impact that this has on performance and dealing with a variety of tasks. What the Craig study basically did is it looked at a series of students all across campuses across the United States. It brought them in and it had them do a simulation driving test. While they were doing this, they were doing different activities. Some of the girls were putting on lipstick. Some of the guys were, changing out the CD or playing with the Sirius stereo. A lot of them were texting. A lot of them were doing other activities, eating, those kinds of things. And then they had them see how well they could actually drive. And time after time after time after time, it showed that you cannot do it well. Yes, we can multitask and we do it all the time, but no, we do not. Our brains are not set up to be able to multitask effectively. We only can handle one really big important item at a time effectively when we're paying attention. That is why being able to be doing 5 different things while you're trying to study or listen to this presentation is not going to work. Okay. All right, when you're trying to listen or trying to gain information for the very first time, which is called encoding again, okay, there is 3 processes that goes through this part, okay? First off, what happens when you're getting new information coming in is you do a real quick, shallow processing of it. And that's what you're doing right now as you're watching the video. Okay, you're seeing the words come across the screen, and basically what happens is it comes across your eyes, it goes into your brain and processes all that kind of good stuff, okay? Shallow processing is basically what's called structural. That's where you're emphasizing the physical structure of the word. That's why I kind of have this in blue here and I have it in a different font, because I wanted you to kind of concentrate on those letters and notice how they were spelled and how they were put together like that. That's what you do when you do called shallow processing. That's when you open your textbook and you're like, okay, fine, I'm going to read the dang textbook. I haven't done it yet, and I spent $100 on this thing. So you start reading it, and immediately your mind wanders, and it starts going, yes, you're reading. You may be even looking at the words, and they're coming across the page, but you're just doing what's called structural processing. Very, very shallow processing. Basically, it's going in one ear and out the other, or in this case, it's going in one eyeball and coming out the other end, because you're not getting anything from it. The second thing you have to be able to do when you're encoding information is you have to do what's called intermediate, which is called phonemic processing. That is where you actually are emphasizing the words that you're reading and that you're coming across, or you're actually taking the information as I'm talking to you, and you're actually not just listening to it and going in one ear and out the other like that's structural. You're actually taking the words and you're thinking about what's being said. You're processing it, in other words, okay? And that is called phonemic processing. Now, the last one, this is where you're actually going to get it. It's called deep processing. This is where you're emphasizing the meaning behind what's being said, and you're actually putting something to it. You're putting some meat to the bone here now, and that is a very important part of it. If you cannot do this part here, letter C, semantic, you can't do this, these 2 things don't matter about trying to prepare yourself for a test or trying to prepare yourself for getting information. You're not going to get it. So how do you do encoding? How can you improve on it? How can I get better so I don't have to fail another one of Rodenberg's tests? You have to use the semantic encoding. Now, how can you do that? What are some tricks to it? Here are 6 really key ways that you can learn to do that. Okay? The first one is called elaboration. Elaboration, I know is a long word, I know it's kind of difficult, but all it simply means is coming up with examples in your head when you're trying to read or trying to listen to this stuff. So as you're reading this, as you're trying to get this information and trying to listen and trying to read the textbook and all the other things that goes on with this, try to link this new information that's coming into you with some other information that you've already had processed earlier before. Try to come up with an example of something in your past that would help you illustrate this idea or help you build on it. Okay, that's key. Number 2, when you're trying to learn anything, whether it's math or science or whatever topic it is, you need to try to use visual imagery. Creating visual images of the word or of the sentence or of the concept that you're trying to learn is very important. Now, it's also difficult because there are some concepts that it's very hard to picture. So I gave you the example here, a juggler versus the word truth. I can immediately think of a juggler juggling all kinds of things, and many of you can probably. But the word truth may be a little bit more difficult to come up with a concept for. So here again, you got to get a little creative. Number three is when you combine the two, is when I come up with an example, and in my example, I start visualizing what I'm seeing, what I'm thinking of, what I'm coming up with. This is called dual encoding. Number four is good old rehearsal. Practice, practice, practice. Now, one of the key things about learning to practice when it comes to encoding and trying to memorize information is that cramming versus distributed method. Cramming sucks. Cramming stupid. Trying to wait to the last minute to study for something is not going to get it passed. Yeah, you could say in high school it worked for me, but guess what? High school, basically anyone can pass. Very few people who really try don't pass high school. It's not that difficult. Distributed method is a lot more, it's a lot better, but it does take a little bit of time. Distributed method is when you study a little bit at a time. So watch this video as soon as the video is done. Maybe watch it again 3 hours down the road, 4 hours down the road, the next day. But you go over it several times, you will get this information way better than sitting here trying to cram it really fast. Also, the key thing you want to make sure you do when you're trying to do this rehearsal is you want to make sure you do what's called serial position effect. That is where you just simply study the beginning and the end of the information, but never the middle. And this is where we typically mess up on tests, is with all that information coming in you have to memorize, we typically forget the middle stuff. That's called serial position effect. Okay, that is the end of the first presentation. Okay, if you want to go back and re-go back over that, that's great. We will talk a little bit about this in class, but basically, you just need to make sure you kind of get it down.